Hello all and welcome to RiskScout's webinar, Check Please, Detecting Fraud Before It Costs You. We are so excited to have you joining us here for an excellent webinar session. Now, before we do dive into today's webinar content, let's run through some quick housekeeping items. RiskScout will be sharing all of today's webinar resources in a follow-up email first thing tomorrow morning, so be sure to keep an eye on your inbox. You can also access all of today's webinar resources, including a copy of this very slide deck in the top right corner of your webinar interface. We also want this session to be as valuable for you as possible, so we encourage you to ask any of the questions that you may have throughout today's session in the Q&A section so we can answer them at the end of the webinar. We will also be running a handful of polls throughout today's presentation to better understand you all, our audience, so your participation is greatly appreciated. In case it's your first time joining us, RiskScout is a team of BSA professionals and former bank examiners, helping financial institutions prevent fraud losses and protect their communities while improving profitability. We've built the platform we wished we had to fight financial crime, focusing on reducing manual work, unlocking new deposit streams, and ensuring regulatory compliance, all without needing to increase headcount. By leveraging our deep industry expertise, seamless data integrations, and intelligent automations, our comprehensive BSA, AML, and fraud platform empowers bankers to do more with less so you can focus on serving your community. If you're interested in learning more, you can always visit RiskScout.com and reach out to get in touch. Elder financial abuse is surging, and your institution can be the difference between catching it early and saving your customer or member from losing their savings. The FBI reports that American seniors lost $7.7 billion to fraud in 2025, which is up 60% from the year prior. Join Corey Lynch next month for his first webinar with us here at RiskScout to see a practical look at how elder financial abuse actually shows up in branch and account activity and what your institution can do about it. Visit RiskScout.com to save your seat or click the link that is being shared in the webinar chat right now. We hope to see you there. This month, RiskScout is proud to be celebrating the 1-year anniversary of our comprehensive integrated fraud solution within the RiskScout platform. In addition to robust features around wire fraud, ACH fraud, elder abuse, new account fraud, and more, our partnership with Mitek Systems enables RiskScout users to identify, escalate, and resolve check fraud without having to switch tabs or leave the platform. This partnership helps bankers save time, reduce losses, and keep their community safe from bad actors while improving the banking experience for their customers and members. We are so excited to be celebrating 1 full year of partnership with Mitek this month, and we thank them for sharing their expertise with us here on this session today. Speaking of today's session, our webinar will be led by Derek Abbott, the Senior Business Intelligence and Strategy Manager at Mitek Systems, and Kristen Parker, the Senior Vice President of Compliance here at RiskScout. Derek's background brings years of experience in banking and deep commitment to fighting fraud and supporting victims. He partners with fraud prevention teams across financial institutions of all sizes, developing advanced detection strategies to stay ahead of evolving threats. His frontline insights also help shape Mitek's product innovations, ensuring cutting-edge solutions for fraud mitigation. Kristen is a seasoned expert in BSA, AML, and fraud prevention, with extensive experience building and implementing monitoring programs for higher risk industries. She has contributed to significant updates in the FFIEC manual, provided practical and risk-based AML guidance at industry events, and played a key role in the development of RiskScout's innovative and actionable BSA solution. Kristen was also recognized by her peers as PBC's 2024 Compliance Person of the Year. We are so excited to have these two joining us today, and without further ado, I will go ahead and pass it over to Derek to tell us a little bit more about Mitek and to dive into today's content. Derek, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan, and thanks for having me here today. One of the best parts of my role here at Mitek is kind of getting out and talking directly with the people who are fighting fraud on the front lines. So this conversation is exactly the kind of thing I always look forward to. Quick bit about me. I've been in banking, like you said, since I was actually old enough to legally have a job. I came up through the branch. I started as a part-time teller in high school, moved into an assistant branch manager role, eventually crossed over into banking software and support. So it's been about 20 or so years now in banking and fraud. And I can honestly say I'm probably more of a fraud nerd now than when I started. If part of my role is I work with our clients and our fraud teams, and there's nothing more I like doing than kind of going down a rabbit hole and kind of digging into a fraud case. Before we get into today's topic, I have to give a quick sense of who Mitek is for anyone that isn't really familiar. Mitek has been around since 1986, so we're not really a new player showing up to the fraud conversation. We're a publicly traded company. Our ticker is MITK. Most people in banking know us as the company that actually invented mobile deposit, but we've also we've built just as strong a reputation in digital identity verification and check fraud prevention as well. Our technology runs at scale. Over 80 million consumers have used the service powered by Mitek, whether that's opening an account, verifying an identity, or depositing a check from your phone. We work with more than 7,000 banks and fintechs across 150 countries globally. On checks specifically, we've actually processed more than 5 billion of them across North America. So this is a space we know deeply, and we're definitely one we're not new to, and we're currently constantly investing in the future. We also invest in staying ahead. We have 107 patents in image science with at least 21 more pending. We're backed by a global team of roughly 650 people, including 75 in-house forensic document examiners. And these are actual fraud and document experts, not just engineers, which is kind of what sets us apart. I think that's good for a high-level overview, Ethan. So if you want to kind of jump, we can kind of get started here.
Absolutely, Derek. That was more than good. It was great. Thank you for that. Now, before we do go on to checking out the facts, let's hit our first poll question. Y'all should see this beginning to pop up on your screen. We want to get a sense of how your institution is currently detecting for fraud in the check space. I have a couple different options here. You can select whichever one works best for your institution. That could be that you already have a solution in place. Maybe you're doing these reviews manually. Maybe there's no solution or process in place, or maybe you're just not sure. You're just coming here to learn a little bit more and maybe take some things home with you along the way. Give y'all just a couple more seconds to get those responses in. All righty, y'all are quick on the draw today. Thank you for those. Let's talk about what all we've got on the call here today. So it looks like almost exactly half of our audience are manually reviewing those checks every day. About a third of the folks on the call have a solution in place that is dedicated to look for this check fraud. 6% are saying no process in place, and 11% here say they're just not quite sure. Derek, I know you're working with institutions battling check fraud every day. How does this kind of stack up with what you were expecting to see here?
This is kind of exactly what we see out, as we're talking to the industry. We have a lot of people, a lot of clients who are currently using a solution. Maybe they're looking to upgrade or kind of move to something different. But we also see there are a lot of banks out there who are still manually reviewing all of their items, which that's just something that banks shouldn't have to do, right? There should be technology in place to kind of help with workloads, to be able to move your resources around to kind of take on more tasks.
Excellent. Well said. Well, let's go ahead and dive into our slides here, and thank you all for participating in that poll.
All right. So who's actually doing this? When you kind of think of check fraud, it's not really opportunistic theft anymore. It's become organized, and I always like to describe it's kind of operating at an industrial scale. Researchers have identified nearly 1 million stolen check images circulating online, not hundreds, not thousands, 1 million. There are now complete channels on things, even places like Facebook, Instagram, that are committing this fraud. It's just out there and it's in the open. And I'm going to focus more on Telegram today because I think there's a lot to learn and be, take away from Telegram. But I just want to make that known. It's not just Telegram. It's Facebook. I've even seen checks for sale on Etsy and eBay. So they're out there and it's just openly being traded. But when we're talking about Telegram, there's hundreds of Telegram channels, if not thousands, dedicated to fraud, whether it's check fraud, payments fraud, identity theft, account takeover. And if you look at the screenshot on here, there's actually channels out there with thousands upon thousands of members. This one channel in particular has 67,000 members. Actually, this channel I believe, was recently shut down, but at the time it was operating pretty openly with that many people in it. 85% of stolen checks get reposted multiple times. They aren't just one-time hits. Checks are turned into commodities. They're reused and resold over and over again. And a lot of the times, we actually see that fraudsters are stealing check images and other offerings from each other and reposting in their own channels. CNBC reported on this directly. Criminals recruiting so-called walkers through Telegram, and America's biggest banks are seeing an 84% increase in check fraud as a result. Telegram isn't just a check fraud problem. It's now the fastest growing source of authorized push payment fraud industry-wide, with scam cases reportedly up 230% year over year. So, the takeaway from this slide is the people you're defending aren't, they're not just, and the ones you're going after aren't lone actors. They're organized, they're networked, and they're moving faster than most fraud programs were built to handle, which we'll cover in the next slide here. Why Telegram matters in my mind. So I guess we should start kind of talking about why Telegram, at least in my mind, should be a significant concern for everyone that's on the call today. For those who don't know, Telegram actually started as a messaging app for chatting with friends or following news or hobby channels. Over the last few years, it's evolved into something much different, and it's no way to describe it really as like a marketplace for fraudsters. Telegram has over 1 billion users globally. So what makes it so attractive to bad actors? It helps to compare, what was before Telegram into what has become. So when I kind of think of fraud, the first thing that always comes to mind is the dark web. And what's interesting about that is the traditional dark web isn't something you can just easily get onto. You needed Tor, which stands for the onion router, which actually it routes your traffic through encrypted layers, kind of like a stack of VPNs. You then, once you got onto the dark web, you had to start search and find your hidden forums. There's no easy Google type searching and search functionality. You have to kind of know of these specific forums that list these channels. And of course, onboarding into these marketplaces wasn't easy because they built trusted networks. Telegram, on the other hand, removes really all of that friction. It's accessible to anyone with a smartphone running a mobile app that most people already know how to use. Channels are publicly searchable, so a fraudster looking for stolen checks, phishing kits, money mules don't really need any special entry point. You just need to know a few keywords. On top of that, Telegram combines several features that create an environment that's pretty much built for fraud. Anonymous users, encrypted and private communication, bots that automate transactions and messaging, public channels that function like storefronts, and very low moderation friction, meaning illicit content can persist for a long time before it's removed, if it's removed at all. Put that against a 1 billion person user base, and you've got a platform with the reach of a mainstream app with little to no moderation. And the main takeaway here for the slide is Telegram isn't the dark web. It's more accessible, it's more mainstream, and in many ways harder to monitor. And that's why I think, as we're talking about different entry points into fraud, this should be a priority threat for your team to understand and kind of get a handle on. Why do fraudsters prefer Telegram? So now that we've talked about, why Telegram is important, I want to talk about how fraudsters are actually using it and why it's become what I think is their platform of choice here. The main thing is that Telegram lowers operational friction for criminals. Every tool, every process, every platform that fraudsters rely on involves some amount of effort and risk, but Telegram actually reduces all of that. Massive group chats and channels mean fraudsters can operate at scale. broadcasting stolen check templates, recruiting money mules to thousands of people simultaneously in those groups. Anonymous usernames and disposable accounts mean participants can operate without revealing their real identity. If an account gets flagged, they simply create a new one in minutes. There's bots and automation that allow fraud operations to run with minimal oversight, really. The storefronts become automated where they're selling stolen credentials. They have bots that are processing orders around the clock. There's file sharing, which makes it easy to distribute templates, forge documents, and other pages without having to use your actual email. Cryptocurrency communities provide a built-in ecosystem for laundering proceeds. And perhaps, the most important piece here is easy channel migration after takedowns means that even when a channel is removed, the operator just rebuilds and redirects their audience to a new one, often within minutes or hours. Now, if you look at the diagram I put together on the right, this is the fraud lifecycle as it plays out on Telegram. And you notice it's a loop. It's not a straight line because as I said, once these channels get shut down, they just reopen under a new name or they kind of just rebuild themselves. It starts with recruiting, bringing in money mules, depositors, and other participants. These recruits are trained and sold tools and techniques. Proceeds and stolen data move into laundering, often through cryptocurrency. The network then coordinates attacks, targeting specific banks or account holders. And when a channel gets banned, they rebuild and start the cycle all over again. It's the last step, the rebuild, that I think is very critical for us to kind of think about and understand. Takedowns are not permanent disruptions. They're temporary inconveniences for these networks, really. The resilience built into how Telegram operates means that fraud groups can rebuild and relaunch pretty quickly. I've seen groups with indicators like a V5 or a V6 in their name, which means they've been shut down and respawned 5 or 6 times and they're still going. And for me and for us, I think detection and monitoring needs to be ongoing, not reactive. Most mature fraud programs today are already leveraging, either some part of third-party monitoring service or an in-house team that continuously track activity. Because point-in-time takedowns alone won't keep pace with how fast these networks rebuild. I mean, for example, when I do my research and I'm kind of doing my thing on Telegram, I think I have 5 or 6 different usernames because a lot of the times you get blocked immediately, but you can just create a new name and get back in. So it's a constant thing that, again, I don't think there's an end in sight. So it's important we keep an eye on this and build this into our fraud strategy somehow. All right, Telegram for fraud as a service. So this slide actually brings together everything I've kind of covered so far, and it's kind of also showing how it operates as a system. What we're looking at is the modernization of check fraud, and the term fraud as a service is something that I think is really, it's meaningful here, and I was intentional with it. The diagram in the center, it kind of mirrors the ecosystem that we've been talking about and talking towards. And I want to talk through like each layer so we're all speaking the same language. At the top is the supply. So this is where the raw materials are coming from. Check vendors selling blank and forged stock or stolen checks. Stolen credential markets are offering bank logins, routing numbers, and account details. There's phishing kit sellers out there providing ready-made spoofed bank websites. Fake and stolen documents, IDs, social security numbers, passports. Those are being used to impersonate account holders. There's fake KYC vendors who can defeat IDV processes. Each of these is a specialized storefront, and buyers can shop across multiple vendors just as they would on a legitimate, shopping website. The middle layer is kind of where Telegram itself functions as the marketplace. There are legit channels just dedicated to checks for sale, treasury checks for sale, OTP bypass services that are guaranteed to defeat the 2-factor authentication, SIM swap groups with insider carrier access, mule recruiters posting job ad style listings to find people willing to kind of, take these stolen or altered checks, go to the branches and kind of cash them and split the funds here. There's fraud as a service bots that automate the creation, fulfillment of orders. And notably, there's also the stuff that we don't like to talk about, the guns and other illicit goods. They all have their channels and they have their place. The bottom is what we call like the cash out and the laundering layer. This is where the money is actually moving. So there's money mules that are receiving and forwarding funds. There's check washers who are physically altering the checks before deposit. Mobile depositors using banking apps and ATMs to get fraudulent checks into the system quickly. Crypto laundering services convert proceeds into cryptocurrency to obscure the trail. And at the top of all of this sits the organizers and the admin, the people running these channels, taking their cut and kind of reinvesting in the operation. From this slide, the key takeaway is when we see a single suspicious transaction, or when you're looking at a check that's altered and you're trying to think of it, it's probably not just a one-time job. Chances are, with the way the fraud landscape has changed, this is probably a part of a larger, well-organized system. So kind of stepping back and looking at it from a wider lens, it starts to make more sense. You have to think more about just the transaction in front of you guys, but also the network that's probably behind it. And yeah, the monkey on the right is a screenshot that I actually grabbed from one of these channels. And it is the fraudster's actual pet. If you look carefully in the background, you can actually see that there's counterfeit currency being made and they're selling it. And they use the monkey in a lot of like their marketing materials for this specific channel. Okay, trust and reputation. One of the things I think that surprises people when they first learn about how these vast fraud networks on Telegram is how organized the trust infrastructure really is. When talking with people about Telegram, I like to say that the trust and reputation is probably very similar, if not exactly the same as sites like Yelp, but it's for fraud. When you think about what makes any marketplace really function, the buyers who are fraudsters need confidence for the products that they're buying, who are also they're buying from fraudsters, right? So you have to make sure you can kind of build up that confidence that you're not going to commit fraud against each other. So sellers need to show that they're credible. Legitimate platforms, they have reviews, ratings, and verified purchases. Telegram fraud channels, they've actually built the exact same thing. The most active fraud channels actually maintain dedicated side channels specifically for reputation management. Testimonials function exactly as you'd expect. Buyers post feedback and vouches after a successful transaction. These posts are usually like sellers to kind of show off their standing in the community, and they're usually pictures or screenshots of deposit slips or balances in a mobile banking app, or even like stacks of cash and nice cars. Escrow systems also exist in Telegram. They add a layer of transaction security. It's usually a neutral third party that holds the funds until both sides confirm the deal is complete and successful, which even further helps reduce the risk of one criminal being scammed by another. The screenshots that I have on here, they actually illustrate exactly what this looks like in real life. So on the right, you can see a bank account balance being shared as proof of a successful fraud. And what that fraudster is saying is like, hey, I took a check that I bought off of you, I deposited it, and look, it's available now. So we're good to go. And this is kind of showing us that operationally, these are not, disorganized groups and channels. They have quality control. They have repeat customers and repeat vendors. The infrastructure of trust makes these networks resilient. Participants have reputations to protect, which really incentivizes reliability and repeat business. This matters because it means we're not dealing with isolated actors. We're dealing with networks and communities where participants have established relationships and track records. They know each other and they're working with each other. Single mules or depositors that we identify are probably more connected to a broader network with history. And that's really the way we need to kind of think about all of these fraud attacks and these, this check fraud scenario and situation we're dealing with, because again, a lot of this is probably it's not a one-off event. I guarantee you a lot of these are people that are recurring and coming back over time. Okay. So why am I presenting about Telegram? Everyone on the webinar joined expecting to hear about the fraud landscape and how the industry is fighting it. I'm talking about Telegram because I personally think Telegram is one of the biggest causes of the check fraud boom, and it also why it's back and won't go away. But to bring this discussion full circle, I want to tie it back to Check Fraud Defender and the battle that we are fighting today. So this is an actual timeline that I pulled together using Telegram images as well as Check Fraud Defender data, showing exactly how a stolen check turned into over $75,000 in fraud losses in less than 2 weeks. So let's kind of walk through it. On January 22nd, a mailbox is reported vandalized, aka broken into. And this is the starting point that anyone on LinkedIn or on the news is probably hearing about every single day. a vandalized mailbox. At one point, this was easy to kind of overlook as like a one-off event, but again, we're hearing about it all the time now. It's constantly happening. So what happened in this scenario was someone actually used an arrow key that they bought off Telegram, went into a mailbox and stole all of the outgoing mail. Just 2 days later, on January 24th, a check from that stolen mail was already posted for sale on Telegram for $25. 2 days. That's really how fast these networks are moving. So they stole the checks, they sorted them, they have it listed for $25, which is less than 10% of the value of the check, within 2 days. The check was photographed, again, listed, and is available for purchase. And it's probably before the victim or whoever that check was supposed to go to even realizes it's missing. On the 29th, which is 5 days after that being listed for sale, multiple altered checks had already been processed through mobile deposit, totaling $11,300. The buyers purchased the check, washed the original, and are already making deposits. Mobile deposit is the preferred channel because it's fast, it's remote, and it creates distance between the depositor and a person. So they're not actually physically going to a branch or an ATM. They're just taking a picture on their phone, committing the fraud. They feel safe and they move on. The next day, to January 30th, that operation escalated significantly. Multiple skilled counterfeits are presented through in-clearing, totaling $64,500 in a single day. Finally, on February 3rd, the account is closed, which we know because check fraud defenders started receiving closed account returns. And by the time that institution has caught up, the fraud had already run its course and moved on. So the total exposure across those 12 days from a vandalized mailbox to account closure is over $75,000, originating from one small check that was sold for $25 on Telegram. This timeline is really the argument for why early detection matters so much. Every stage after January 24th was enabled by the speed and infrastructure of these networks. The faster we can identify and act on these indicators at the deposit stage, the more of the timeline we can interrupt. And so we've spent the last several slides kind of inside the ecosystem, how it's organized, how it operates, how resilient it is. But now let's kind of just bring it back to what it actually means for the institution itself. Check fraud is now the #1 most targeted payment method, with 58% of organizations impacted and affected in 2025. So let's kind of let that sink in for a sec, right? It's not a niche threat anymore. Gone are the days where we're experiencing what I call like unskilled counterfeits, where the fraudster gets a hold of an account number and a routing number, and they're just throwing a guess together of what it's supposed to look like. This isn't what we're seeing anymore. We're seeing skilled counterfeits, skilled forgeries, where because they have the good check of what it's, they have the exact image of what it's supposed to look like. So they know exactly what they're counterfeiting or forging or altering. If we look at the trends on the left here, check fraud losses across the Americas went from 21 billion in 2023 to 24 billion in 2024 to what's an estimated 27 billion in 2025. So that's a 29% increase in just 2 years. And, given everything we've kind of covered so far and talked about, I have a feeling it's going to go up even more. I'm guessing probably more than 29% over the next year. And here's the part that should kind of get everyone's attention. And this is something I think about a lot too, coming from the banking world, is 1 in 5 firms recover nothing after a payment fraud loss. So no partial recovery, no money back at all. It's gone. So why does this land on us, as a financial institution, or why is it landing on you guys? Financial institutions are usually the ones that absorb the losses directly. And, I always think beyond the idea of a balance sheet problem, because coming from the banking world, I'm sure all of you guys hear it just as much as I used to hear. Customer experience is key, right? So it's all about the customer experience. So what we've realized is about 31% of customers actually leave their FI entirely after experiencing some sort of fraud on their account. So it's not really just a fraud loss conversation. It's more of like a customer retention and a brand trust conversation. So everything we've covered so far, the scale, the organization, the resilience of these networks, this is the bottom line. It produces rising losses, shrinking recovery, and customers who don't stick around to see if you'll fix it.
Excellent. Well said, Derek. Definitely some Startling stats in there. We want to put our next poll question on the screen. I know, as Derek mentioned, we know over the majority of financial institutions are impacted by this, but we are curious at how well the folks that are impacted are actually catching that fraud. So the question on the screen is asking, what percent of check fraud are you currently catching today? And those options are maybe under 50% of the check fraud that's coming in, between 50 and 65%. Maybe 66 to 80%, or over 80% that check fraud, or perfectly acceptable answer, maybe you're not measuring or you're just not sure what percent of the check fraud you're catching today. We'll leave that question open for just a couple seconds here to get responses in, and we'll certainly be interested to see where the folks on the call are sitting and how much of that fraud they are catching on average. All right. Thank you for those responses. Let's turn that around and let's see what we've got here. Looks like 17% of our audience is saying that they are catching under 50% of that check fraud coming through their institution. 6% are at the 66 to 80% mark. Fortunately, 39% of the folks on the call today are saying that they're catching over 80% of that check fraud, which is great to hear. And then another 39% saying that they aren't quite sure. Derek, I know that you're in these statistics daily. Maybe could shed some light on how the spread usually plays out across Mitek's usual customer base, and then maybe for the folks that aren't sure and don't know, how can they get to this number and know what percent they are catching?
Yeah, these numbers actually make sense as well. You know, one of the things we've noticed, and as we've heard in the industry for the past couple of years, is people are running systems that are no longer being invested in. You know, checks and check fraud were supposed to be going away completely, right? So why were people stopped really investing in these types of systems, and they focus more on the real-time payment side of the house, the cards, the ACH, the wires, that type of stuff. So a lot of them were stuck using technology in the past, and this really covers the under 50%, right? Because, you know, whether you're leveraging image or you're not even leveraging image, you're just doing transaction only, like the ASI systems of back in the day. That kind of leaves you open for what we're seeing now with this huge shift in the fraud landscape. For the people that are kind of hitting the 66 to 80 or above, they must be running a system that, you know, combines transaction and image, or they're doing the manual review, like some of our clients said on the earlier poll. They're actually looking at everything. So it's really what we're experiencing in the landscape. But what we're also seeing is a lot of the times these financial institutions are now having to invest quickly because they're like, well, check fraud's back and it's starting to hurt us. We need to get back into the system. So now they're getting into these AI-based systems that are helping them get to where they need to be. So these numbers are right on point with what I see.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about the integrated approach that we take across RiskScout and Mitek together.
Yeah. So we've spent, you know, this entire session so far inside the problem, how organized these networks are, how fast these losses are climbing, how little institutions recover once fraud happens. But let's talk about why I think so many of these institutions are still losing the fight, even when they're investing in fraud tools. And to me, what I see a lot when I meet with all these clients in the field is it's rarely a detection problem. It's more of a fragmentation problem. If you look at the left side here, the fragmented stack, check images get reviewed in isolation from customer and member risk. So a brand new account and a 20-year account get treated exactly the same, even though the risk profile is completely different. You know, every deposit channel, whether it's branch, mobile, ATM, RDC, they're getting screened by different tools because at the time when they were standing up these systems, there was no tool that could handle all of them. So a fraudster, you know, who's getting blocked through the branch just shifts to mobile or ATM or RDC, and they can quickly move over and, you know, continue their fraud. Cases are getting tracked across spreadsheets and emails instead of a shared system. And here's a number that kind of really drives this home. 90% of forged checks that we've seen actually are hitting accounts that are less than a year old. But most check tools have no visibility into core data like that. So they don't actually know anything about the account age at all. The signal's there, the tools are just able to kind of leverage it. But if you kind of look at the right side, you know, an integrated defense puts image forensic and risk scoring into a single flow. Account age, customer risk, and check image analysis are informing each other, not sitting in separate silos working separately. It catches, different checks regardless of which channel they came through. Case management is unified with SAR filings built directly into the workflow instead of bolted on afterwards or, through a separate system. But maybe like most important, every resolved case kind of feeds the model. So detection is actually compounding and getting better and improving over time instead of every case starting from zero. Really, the bottom line is like right here at the bottom of the slide, a fragmented stack means slower detection, more false positives, and more fraud that's missed. An integrated one means you're catching more fraud, you're faster, and with less manual work. Given everything we've kind of talked about today, the scale of these networks, how fast they're rebuilding, how organized the trust systems are, the institutions that kind of win here aren't necessarily the ones with the most tools. They're the ones that have the tools that actually communicate with each other and are kind of bringing everything together. Check Fraud Defender. That's the whole reason I'm here. So what does integrated defense actually look like in practice? This is kind of where Check Fraud Defender, or what I'll call CFD, kind of comes in. One platform, every channel, real time. Those are all the salesy words you hear, but it's kind of, we've built our platform because that's what everyone wants and needs. First, we're using AI and computer vision. So the system is comparing signatures, payees, check images, so we can flag things like potential alterations, forgeries, and counterfeits. And even what we're seeing a lot of is like the Gen AI created fraud. The Check Fraud Defender is actually built in a way to be able to leverage known good images from across the United States, from banks all over the place of all sizes. It's the only solution really that's covering both deposit and clearing fraud in a single unified platform. We always say like a check is a check. We don't care where it comes from. If we have an image to compare it against, we're going to return scoring for you to kind of make that final decision. All deposit channels are monitored together: mobile, branch, ATM, remote deposit, in clearing. So a fraudster can't just get blocked on one and move to another one. You can have insights across all of the channels. And fourth, the consortium intelligence. And this is kind of like what I think is the very interesting piece here is you're able to leverage observed data from over 8,500 institutions and credit unions across the United States. So you're not just detecting fraud based on what's happened at your institution. You're benefiting from patterns observed across the entire network, which means, it's giving you insights on your deposits, which you've never had before. We're able to tell you, like, not only, I guess to take a step back, what I've seen, a lot of consortiums are kind of built and based on negative intel, meaning this account has had fraud claims on it, or this account has seen certain types of behavior, or it's closed. Check Fraud Defender does the opposite. We actually know what's good at the account level, and we're able to tell you, hey, this deposit doesn't make sense because the signature doesn't match, or the check stock looks different, or even down to the level of the security features or the borders on this check don't make sense on this deposit from what we've seen recently from other institutions. So you're actually getting that level of detail for every item that we score. And Kristen, I think this one is for you.
Indeed, it is. Well, I'm just so taken aback by Derek being so fascinating in his facts. I'm over here just fangirling a little bit. The way we look at check fraud for our institutions, when we're having conversations every single day with prospects and our own existing customers, and check fraud is just forefront of all the conversations. So when we talked about how can we address this with our institutions, there was no point in RiskScout rebuilding check fraud because Mitek does it so well. And so we are really, really proud to be partners with Mitek and have found with our own customer base that they are the fruits and bounds, the benefit that they've had from utilizing our partnership with Mitek through RiskScout. So when a check is presented here, or at the institution, it goes through a imaging process through some X9 files, and that those X9 files are provided to RiskScout, who then passes them along to Mitek. As soon as we get them over to Mitek, it's about 15 minutes later that we get that analysis back from Mitek, and those checks are presented. The ones that are flagged are presented for the institution. So there's a notification that is sent out, and then there is a process I'll show you in RiskScout that allows you to compare the checks side by side, front and back. We score based off of how the configuration is within the Mitek configuration within RiskScout is configured. We show the scores of why this is flagged, and then we see the analysts go in, research that, and they can do this so rapidly, guys. They can do it in a minute. You can typically tell pretty quickly what if there is an issue or not, because it's so sharp on the information that's provided from Mitek. And then from there, if the analyst decides that it is potentially a fraudulent issue or something like that, the case is opened and the investigation is had. The institution still has to go back and either put a hold on the check or return the check behind the scenes, but they can mark it as fraud if they need to. And if that's the case, they can do their investigation, take place there, or if it is truly not a fraudulent situation, then the case is closed. And so if it is a fraudulent case that meets the SAR filing requirements, then the SAR is followed through and filed within RiskScout. So you get the whole picture of the customer, which was what Derek was speaking to earlier. That fragmented approach we see oftentimes costs the institution, once they put the numbers together, more than it does to just actually purchase this addition that folks can utilize within RiskScout itself.
All right, gang, I think we can go ahead and get to the let's check it out section. So, Kristen, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the inside. But first things first, let's ask our next poll question. That's going to pop up. We want to hear a little bit about the friction points that y'all are encountering during your check fraud investigations. We know there are lots of things that make it hard to catch these. Maybe it's the disconnected systems that we had mentioned. Maybe you're using a solution, but it's a little bit outdated, doesn't quite have the data that's necessary there. Maybe the data that is coming in isn't that great, doesn't come fast enough. That data is missing some key information. Maybe it's the amount of staff and time in the day to actually get these alerts reviewed, or it could be something entirely different. And you know what? One of the benefits of this is you can submit as many or as few of these challenges that y'all are experiencing. So we'd love to hear from y'all on what the biggest pain points and your current processes are today before we check out the inside of the solution. Let's go ahead and turn those around and see what is grinding gears for folks these days. Looks like the number one biggest pain point there is those disconnected systems. To both Kristen and Derek's point, not being able to have that full customer or member view is painful. It can be tough to know exactly what is going on behind the scenes and whether or not a check is actually suspicious there. We actually looks like we've got a nice tie here for second place across outdated solutions, lack of data or poor data, and lack of staff and bandwidth. Popular among our attendees of 20% saying that they're all facing this challenge, and then 14% of folks saying that they're encountering something completely different there. Kristen, I know you work with our institutions here. Is this kind of what you hear when they're talking to you about some of the pain points they're experiencing with check fraud?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the institutions have no check fraud, except a human looking at them every day. That can be a complacency issue that happens. That's just a lack of time. The number of checks that are still clearing are astronomical. And so having, processes in place that slow them down and potentially cause them disconnected issues, even if they have a system. As other check fraud systems I have used just as a banker myself in this didn't always get you the efficiencies you needed either, because a lot of times the checks that they would pull up for you to compare against was not at all something that was the same signer within the same time frame of a check clearing, those things like that. So yeah, it's all about it's not just about having a check fraud system, it's having a check fraud system that actually gets you efficiencies back in your day-to-day life and saves you money. So when we have our institutions on board, they absolutely can come in and purchase Mitek right off the bat. Sometimes we don't see people do that because they feel like from a cost perspective, but which kind of frankly blows my mind a little bit because it takes one bad check fraud event for Mitek to pay for itself. I was once at an institution that lost several $1,000,000 in a check fraud event that went on for 60 to 90 days before anybody noticed it was happening right under our noses. So the opportunity is there, though. If you are an existing customer of RiskScout and you want Mitek, that's absolutely something we can add on. It's not an issue for that component of things. Everything is built in and integrated into one system, so you don't have that fragmented issue. And the amount of losses you're able to help prevent your institution are the juice is worth the squeeze, guys. It really is. When Mitek does review the check fraud components here, they're looking at 24 different detectors here, and there's X-ray imaging that happens. There's AI usage that happens. The X-ray imaging is really good for washing, which happens quite often in the space that we work in. These 24 different detectors. I think one thing to just point out and glaringly say is this is not just looking at checks at your institution that have your routing number. It's deposited checks as well, so that's a huge lift too. Not any other really mini solutions don't offer that, right? So if deposited checks or honest checks are being reviewed for all of these different factors, and that's what we present in RiskScout to you, is if some of these factors are above the threshold of the configuration, that's going to be then that alert that you get to see within RiskScout to review what potentially the issue might be.
All right, Kristen, let's go inside the solution here and see if we can get a quick walkthrough of what that might actually look like for someone using the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll take you through a quick view of everything. And in the configuration session itself, there's lots of optionality. We work that specifically to whatever your risk appetite is, what's the issues you've seen historically. Once a check is presented and then it goes through the process of being evaluated, it comes back to RiskScout. If it's flagged, whether it's flagged or not, you can see the check in here or not. But our view defaults to the ones that have been flagged. You get to see your analyzed check on this side and the best candidate check. The best candidate check has to be at least 31 days old and not have any return codes associated with it. And what I love about the best candidate check too is it also is trying to pull back a similar signer on there. So if you're in a business account or something that has multiple signers, the issue can often be that, okay, yeah, you pulled a check, but now, oh great, now I got to do manual work over here and I got to go back and pull a signature card and old checks, and none of that nonsense with Mitek. We can click on the check. We can see the front of the check. We can quickly see the back of the check on here if it is available. And all of the detectors are listed over here. The rule violations, this is my demo institution. I don't have them laid out over here, but these are all of the 24 factors we just reviewed, and it's scoring those out of 1,000 to say these are the biggest issues that we're seeing. Each of the score detectors are listed here. 9 times out of 10, all you got to do is just take a peek at this and you're like, oh, we got a problem here. So it's usually taking folks 60 seconds or less to do these. In RiskScout, you can mark it as fraud or not fraud. Obviously, we make you make notes in there because if it's not documented, it didn't happen. You can assign these cases to whomever you need to. And then if it is a potential issue, you can link this to either a fraud case or an AML case, whoever's working it, however your institution is designed, and that's where you can ultimately make your decision on next steps, whether that be file a SAR, return the checks, so on and so forth from there. All of your notes are kept in here. Just for sake to show you too, this is all locked behind permission. So if you had a fraud team that was dedicated to just maybe they're in deposit ops and they're looking through checks, this is locked down to where they can utilize that, and from there they can make their decisions and document everything in here. So lots of optionality in regards to that portion of things, but it's just lovely to see that it's all integrated into RiskScout's full platform here. So that, you know, if you're working your regular alerts, then you have Mitek alerts, and then your ACH and your wire alerts over here. All of it's integrated. You get to see the whole picture of the customer itself through the system here. All good stuff, Ethan.
Excellent. Well said. I think, yeah, here at RiskScout, we always say if technology is making it easier for the fraudsters, maybe we should use our tech on our side to make it a little bit easier for the good guys. So thanks for showing that off, Kristen. Derek, do you want to walk us through some of the key takeaways as we kind of wrap up here? We've got some great questions, so I want to make sure we've got some time for Q&A after this.
Sure, yeah. Key takeaways. Bank and credit union branches remain an important part of the banking journey. When you think about it, it makes perfect sense, right? While at one part, they're the ones that are seeing the people coming up with the checks, they're also the ones that need to make that final decision. And when I was a teller, I know when I was told you need to do your best to figure out whether you think a check is fraud or not, I was horrified. So I was like, I signed up to accept checks and kind of move on. So when they were, you know, the bank I was working at, like, you need to kind of, now you need to take check fraud in as well. It's a whole other animal, and being able to kind of leverage some sort of technology at the branch and at the teller line, it's just game changing. You take that stress out of the teller's job and help them do what they're supposed to do. They take the check, they set the deposit, they cash the check, and that takes the stress out of what else they have to do. You know, traditional brick and mortar establishments, they're always going to be targets. And again, like I said, they're always targets, and it's always the front line are the ones that are kind of fighting it. Either that, or it's coming through your mobile channels or your channels where there are no friction. You know, I'll keep saying it. One of the whole idea behind Check Fraud Defender was we want to be able to do it in real time to kind of, you know, we want you to be able to leverage technology that will allow you to stop fraud and kind of take the guessing out of what's going on. Make that decision quickly. This doesn't match. Put a hold on it. Move on. Right. Again, the end of the day, you don't want the tellers stressing out and having to make these decisions when there's a technology available to do it at the time of the deposit while it's happening. You know, I've always been a believer in consortium data, and you hear about consortium data all the time, whether it's real or not, you know, what type of the data you're getting insights into. The only way we're going to stop fraud is by institutions working together. And the way Mitek does it today with Check Fraud Defender is the profiles that each institution build are then available to kind of help another institution's deposits. Because when you think about it, one institution's in clearing problem is probably another institution's deposit problem. So at the end of the day, the more our institutions work together, whether it's through CFD, you know, Check Fraud Defender Consortium, or another type of data or image consortium, that's the only way we're going to be able to stop fraud and stop this from kind of making it into the system and impacting your customers.
Excellent. Well said there. Definitely helpful key takeaways there for us. Now, we are going to go ahead and shift over into Q&A. We've got one final poll question that you'll be seeing come up on your screen here. This is just a great way if you would like to get in touch with RiskScout or Mitek about any of the things that we covered today or anything else that we do to help fight against bad actors in financial crime. This is a great way to say, yes, I would love to get in touch after today's call. But in the meantime, while we leave that up, Derek, you were just mentioning how important it is for institutions to collaborate. One of the questions that we received was asking, are there good ways when we are hit with a check fraud instance to communicate with our other local institutions to see if they have also been impacted, or there are ways that we can stop this? Can you share any insights on how maybe smaller local community institutions might be able to collaborate with each other?
Yeah, one of the great benefits, and when I was in banking early on, we used to have, we actually just had like groups where the fraud teams would get together. You know, you reach out to your local branches or your local banks, to even if they're larger, and say, hey, look, we're in your area. We know we're seeing the same fraud as you guys. Let's partner up and see what we can do. Even if it's via email, just, hey, are you seeing this? You know, don't share images, obviously, but just kind of open the lines of communication, because at the end of the day, you guys are all being hit, and we know that. So whether you work together that's the only way you're going to stop it, is giving each other a heads up. While it may help you today, down the road, it's going to help them. So, opening lines of communication is the only way to do it.
Excellent. That's very helpful. Thank you there. We had another question that was asking, right, we spent a lot of time talking about Telegram and Tor at the beginning of the session. Are there monitoring tools that we can put in place to help identify those sorts of activities before the check fraud event even happens, to maybe be a little bit more proactive?
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of third-party solutions out there that are always keeping an eye on it. To be honest, I spend a lot of time on it personally, and it's very easy to do. You don't need, depending on how large your institution is, you can log in and you could just quickly search your bank name, and chances are something's going to pop up. It's not, granted, it's not something you want to be stuck doing every single day if you have other, jobs to do and it's not part of your role. But there definitely are third parties out there that can focus solely on your institution. We actually do within Check Fraud Defender. It's something we leverage as part of an additional signal where we're always monitoring, Telegram, the dark web, and it's kind of built into our risks, some of our risk signals that come back. So it's something that we're doing, but again, it's not hard, and that's the problem, where it's easy for fraudsters to use it. It's an app that you could download within 30 seconds for free. You could find a quick how-to guide, and you could get on there and you could start searching your own institution.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We had another question asking, are the checks already posted by the time that they hit RiskScout and Mitek? Kristen, can you maybe speak to that one?
Yeah, so they are posted, but by the time we get the X9 file and do the analysis, it's still within the window of time frame that you have to return the check or put a hold on the check legally. So while it's already posted, you still have the opportunity to take action on it.
Excellent. I think we've got time for one more. Derek, I'll throw this one over to you as a seasoned check fraud expert. Do you have any recommendations for other outlets or trainings that we can use to kind of keep our finger on the pulse as we move forward? And this person put a particular emphasis on maybe getting help training their frontline tellers to identify check fraud trends. Any advice there?
Of course. Depending on what route you want to go down, if you want to stick on the free route, if I believe the ABA, the Federal Reserve, they all post bulletins of what's going on in the industry. Easy one-pagers that you can share with your teller line even. It's as easy as searching, free teller fraud training. I was actually doing it before a call the other day just to kind of see what was out there. If you want to take it a step further, there's always, the fraud groups, whether it's IIFCI or, the Association of Financial Crimes Investigators. There's always groups out there that are willing to share and help train as well. You just got to spend a little time figuring out what's right for your institution, your budget, and things like that. But you can definitely always find something.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for that. And thank you to everyone that asked those questions. Of course, our mission here is always to help take the BS out of BSA. So hopefully got a little bit closer to that after today's session. Of course, we do also want to encourage y'all to reach out and follow up if we had any questions that we weren't able to answer on the call, or maybe there's something that's a little bit more in-depth or niche that you want to follow up with one-on-one. We've got Derek and Kristen's emails up here. I'm sure that they would love to talk check fraud all day long. So feel free to reach out there. I do want to give a big, big thank you to both Kristen and Derek for taking the time to not only share with us here today, but to build this presentation and to compile all the expertise that they have over the years. So means a lot there. And for all of our attendees, a reminder to keep an eye on your inbox, as we will be sending the recording, today's slides, and all of the other resources from today's session. That will be in your inbox first thing tomorrow morning. We do have a brief survey that pops up at the end of the webinar where you can give us a little bit of feedback on how we did, can ask for potential future session topics or any other questions that you have, or let us know if you want to get in touch afterwards. So would greatly appreciate y'all taking a moment to complete that. And as always, if you've got any other questions, if you want to learn more about RiskScout, or if you just want to stop by and say hi, you can find us at riskscout.com. Thanks again for taking some time and joining us, and we hope to see you on our next session. Thanks all.